Good afternoon, friends and newcomers to our Friday special conversations with special people. Today we have a great speaker, Wayne Eastman, author and professor of business and business law at Rutgers Business School. Wayne first spoke here on September 22nd, 2016 on the topic Global Business Ethics, and on March 23rd, 2017 on the topic Making Our Lives Sustainable. Today, Wayne will speak on the topic America, the business way forward. In today's world, things are rapidly changing, and so I can't wait to hear what Wayne will tell us about it. So please let us give a very warm welcome to our very special guest, Wayne Eastman.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank
Okay, and of course I'm used to Q&A with these, and I very much hope that we'll be doing that with the feature and so on. I guess what I'm used to is that I talk for a while and then kind of open it up. And so I imagine then all of you can get unmuted and fire away. Melissa, all your points on statues, and others of you, perhaps you'll have some reactions to what I have to say as well. Okay, I also, by the way, as you can see, I'm in my home. I'm sure that's a genuine palm line beach that Phyllis is at. Maybe it's a green screen, but wherever you are, welcome all today. I'm looking forward eventually, as I bet all of you are, to resuming sessions in the library live. But for now, hey, life's an experiment, and all of what we're doing now is part of that. That kind of introduces the theme today. Phyllis's title, America, the Business Way Forward, that we talked about, makes it sound as though this is just about business. But when Phyllis and I talked, there was a sort of sense that people were interested in and concerned about, understandably, all the things that are going on now. What a moment it is, America in 2020. Well, there's a world pandemic in which casualties, deaths, unfortunately, are particularly high in our country. There's a formidable, though may we hope not too long-lived, economic recession that's going on with over 10% unemployment at the moment. And there is deep-seated civil unrest, that I recall in some ways as a much younger person in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and we've seen episodically in other ways, but over the past several months, sort of, unrest in various ways in various places, raising, many, many interesting challenges for us as a society. And then, of course, on top of the pandemic, the recession, and civil unrest, there happens to be an election coming up very soon with two candidates. I imagine some of you, many of you, most of you, all of you as active, concerned people were tuning in to at least some of the respective quadrennial conventions hosted by the Republicans recently and the Democrats just before that. And we obviously have two contending sides. And obviously feelings are strong on this sort of thing. As I told Phyllis, I'm not going to present a barn burner or stem winder and so on. You'll get some idea of where I'm coming from on all these things. But just to sort of summarize what you might say the takeaways seem to me to be coming out of the two parties' conventions. First, the recently concluded Republican convention. We can imagine our president saying, in essence, I think he referred a couple times in his speech the other night, last night was it, to Chinese virus, as he likes to call it, and says his message, well, I've handled the Chinese virus better than any other leader. And who needs those darn masks anyway? It sort of dramatically illustrated, not that he used those words, but that you've got 1,500 people crammed in on the White House lawn, most of them not wearing masks, at least according to what I read in the paper today. What does he have to say on a second major issue, the economy? Well, in essence, the message I think boils down to the economy was going great until the pandemic. It'll be great again. I can make it grow. Okay. And then finally, on the sort of a third sort of central element in our minds now, the moment of protest and civil unrest, a rather simple message from the Republican side from President Trump: law and order, no to anarchy. Well, well, well. Now, Joe Biden, recently nominated by the Democrats. The message, I take it, is something along the following lines. The administration's response, Trump's response to COVID-19 has been a disaster. Wear your masks, people. What about the economy? Well, something like the economy can work better for everyone. And I, working with Democrats in the House and Senate, will work to make it that way. Civil unrest, something like no to looting, but yes to nonviolent protest and to reform. Now, in what I have to talk about today, I'll be focusing on the economy, but I suppose all of the other areas, the pandemic, civil unrest, are in the background, particularly the civil unrest, and well, yes, of course, the election. And so if your questions and concerns turn to that a little bit later after I'm done talking with the Q&A with your own thoughts and inquiries, that's great. What I am going to focus on today is the economy, as in Phyllis's statement. Why? Well, one reason I think that is relevant, particularly, I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody, but could it be that there are more Democrats in my audience than Republicans? Well, that would be my guess. And the economy is the one area I would suggest in which there is, at least as shown by polls, a preference for the Republican side and for President Trump. That's, not positive ratings in terms of his handling of the pandemic or of civil unrest, but he is rated more favorably than Joe Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans are in general on the economy, despite a very serious recession that we're now in. So some of my remarks, whatever you take them to be in terms of where I'm coming from politically or what I'm supporting, can be seen as Democrats.
Discretionary income.
Hello? This is an area of weakness for the Democrats relative to the Republicans. And in a sense, I'm trying to explore why that is so and how that might be different. So it's a business way forward, but yes, I'm also going to be doing it against the background of American politics. So the idea is to give a fresh take on the economic challenges and opportunities facing the US and also facing American business, and to do so in a way that, yes, may be useful to Democrats who are thinking, how can the message be updated? But I also regard it as, I hope, of interest to Republicans. Okay, to look at the future of American business, I think we want to understand the past. That is the late 20th century development of American business in a really rather different direction from the one that it took from the 1930s through the 1970s, when many of you, I was alive then too, and many of you were very much at the center of things during those key years when Franklin Roosevelt swept the board 4 elections in a row, and the US moved toward a type of economy that was significantly different from the American economy pre-New Deal. That's a fascinating story in itself. But then the economy changed again in a big way. The 1980s and Ronald Reagan are the conventional point of demarcation, and I basically agree that something big did change. In my young adult years, as I was coming out of law school to practice law in Manhattan, basically American corporations moved from an America-centered vision in which largely you were a company that was based here and manufacturing here, selling here, to a globally oriented vision. Connected to that global change on the part of large American business was a change toward emphasizing shareholder value and shareholder welfare. So that has been a large-scale change. It's fascinating. I'm particularly interested in its relationship to China. Phyllis maybe didn't mention that that's another topic I've talked about to all of you. Perhaps you remember, some of you, a presentation I did on China, partly personal, my son, our trips around China, and so on. But the old American business model up to really now has been the US investing around the world, and yes, particularly in China, Chimerica, some have called it. So any sort of what's ahead for American business approach has to grapple with, what do you think about the current model? My own sense, and yep, we can talk about this till the cows come home, is that there have been many fine things about what American business has done over the last roughly now 40 years. The economic growth achieved in countries like China in particular, India to a fair degree, and many less developed countries around the world has truly been impressive. And the role of American, and yes, other rich country multinationals in that, I believe has been important, much as the countries themselves, China, Indonesia, India, and others, deserve central credit for growth in their own economies. So my own sense is that the take on the future, how is American business and American society going to go, is not in the direction of saying no to the globally oriented corporation that has risen to a central role in our society in the last 40 years. For all its troubles, all its woes, much noted in terms of the hollowing out of the Rust Belt, increases in rewards to sometimes phenomenal levels to the people who have developed new corporations in sectors like tech, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and others. The model that we've developed in American business has, I believe, gone along not only with global benefits, but also with, yes, an American business sector that is the world's most innovative and has led us to significantly better growth than our Western European and Japanese developed nation peers over the last 40 years. So in that regard, the Democrats have a big choice. There are proposals to say we should not have a shareholder-oriented, globally oriented focus for American business. So to give a prominent example that I talked about at a little conference we held at Rutgers Business School, Elizabeth Warren, always on the ball in terms of analysis and proposals, has advanced a bill under which there would be required federal chartering of large corporations, and 40% of these corporations' directors would have to be employee members. Bernie Sanders, during his briefly highly successful campaign, advanced a somewhat more radical version of Elizabeth Warren's bill. One can discuss and debate these bills. In my view, they would be deeply misconceived. It would be too bad for people in this country, and yes, for workers around the world, if American corporations at the leading edge, globally oriented corporations, turned inward, became more nationalistic, less productive, and less innovative, as I believe they would become under the Warren and Sanders proposals. So if that were all I were telling you, I would be telling you, hey, the Republicans have a point on economic policy. I think that sort of intuition is in the air in terms of the national ratings of the Republicans more favorably on economics than the Democrats on the economy in its growth and performance. But I want to give us another perspective that I don't think the way forward is more of the same, full steam ahead, global supply chain management, shareholder-oriented corporations. I think this country could badly use the rise of a different kind of corporation, more socially oriented, more value-driven. I do teach business ethics after all. And I think it's good to foster pro-social behavior, corporate social responsibility in the existing titans of business, the Amazons, the new era economies, countries, new economy companies, and the old economy companies like GM. I think the real opportunities lie in new businesses altogether. So instead of saying, let's cut down or essentially turn the existing dynamic corporate sector to nationalistic purposes, come back to America, guys. Instead, support the rise of different corporations that are oriented toward providing jobs, products, and services to important value-oriented groups in our society, even if those groups are, as I believe they are, a minority of the population. So let's go back to Senator Sanders and his supporters, many of whom are passionate. Some of you may well strongly support Senator Sanders. Some of you, whether you do or not, will have younger relatives in your family who do. The concern about capitalism, the profit motive, the grinding aspects of capitalist enterprise, I believe are valid concerns to have, much as I believe that creating an anti-profit national system against business is a very, very poor idea indeed. So what could you do? What should our society organize for politically, and how could business be part of this? Instead of national socialism, instead, voluntary. What percentage of people in our community in Selma or in other communities like the Sanders model of essentially getting away from profit orientation, those darn billionaires and all that? A minority, I believe, that loses elections again and again in America, I believe. On the other hand, I really think minorities deserve respect too. Why can't 10% of the people, say in Soma and other communities, aggregate their socialistic beliefs and their buying power to support a new sector of nonprofit businesses in which they could work as well as buy products from and services from? So forget the old bad fantasies of socialism as a compulsory global system. How about experiments in radical living supported by a new business sector in which people can work? So you don't simply have to be a professor, a teacher, a government employee if you don't want to be part of capitalism. You can be part of, to borrow a phrase from another president, a kinder, gentler capitalistic sector that's oriented toward, yes, people like you. In that case, I'm using socialists as an example. How about all those Rust Belt folks? A certain side of me says, you know, as a former President Bill Clinton tried to explain, look, the world's changing. We got to skill up. The fact that your dad could have a good job as a union worker in Michigan in the 1950s, it doesn't work that way anymore. Okay. But much as I'm a believer personally in the rise of the world globally and in free trade and immigration, I think just as there's a place for a community of those who support socialism within America, there's a place for voluntary communities that are about work and buy America. We want a different kind of company. We're not for Apple and their Chinese supply chain. Sure, they sell good phones, but we just want to buy phones that are made in America by American workers. Good for you guys. Do I support regulating Apple out of business in their global supply chain? No way. Do I support people self-organizing with the help of, yes, legal and political reforms. I got a lot of sympathy for Professor Warren's bent on that. After all, I went to her school. You know, she's a professor at where I went to law school. I think she and others who are legally oriented can use their energies not to compel American business to be one way, but to make it more possible that the companies, the global multinational companies that dominate, let them do their thing. Lots of us like that way of life. But for those of us who don't, Rust Belt workers, those of us who are socialists, let us organize too for a different way of life and for a different way of business. To sort of try to tie this back to the social unrest that our country is facing right now along racial lines, ethnic lines, but you know, the enduring role of race in American society. Another topic I've talked about long ago here at the South Orange Public Library. I was at a march in New York at sort of the height of things in early June, and remember feeling many things. You know, predominantly I was extremely old. There was very much young people, and yes, people I would stereotype as sort of young white Bernie Sanders sort of supporters, and then many African Americans, bigger age range also. And I remember thinking, wow, what a lot of potential here. But in a way, isn't the potential not, and I've talked about this with socialism, it's not about trying to say one best way, let's follow the socialist model. Nope. And I would suggest the long and unfinished drama of African American advancement in this country has something to do with the same ideas. Many African Americans, most I believe, favor integration in, let's say, the general economy represented by, yes, companies like Apple and General Motors. But is there a role for Black empowerment and community through groups of self-organized African Americans in communities like, let's say, Soma? You don't secede from Soma, but you have the ability to have some degree of self-determination and involvement in various sectors. Educational policy, arguably, another preoccupation of mine. And back to the business theme, in yes, Black-owned businesses that hire predominantly Black employees. Can the dream of Black capitalism articulated over the years, can that finally be a way that really we get going on? Can that be a priority for those who want change? The GOP may pick up on that. Richard Nixon, a controversial president of my childhood with many bad features, but not all bad ones, called for Black capitalism many years ago. But perhaps it's the Democrats who really should be picking up the mantle to say, look, our beef shouldn't be with the dynamism, the competitive energy of American business, which is, yes, the world's most productive and innovative business sector, but rather with the idea that one size does not fit all. Many groups within our society, legitimately, minorities, but important ones, seek a different way of life, or at least the options to have something different from the profit-oriented global business model in its harder version that we've come used to in this country in the last 40 years. I think our global business sector, the turn of America toward the globe, has been all that good and all that valuable. But the people who feel, no, this is not for me. I don't like the Jeff Bezos, big corporation, global kind of orientation. I want something different, whether they're Bernie brothers or Rust Belt workers. The American business sector should change to offer them opportunities too. Business is a big part of the story, but if it's going to happen, yes, it's going to involve politics. I personally think there's more of a chance that these changes would happen in future Democratic administrations than Republican ones, but one could debate that or argue that. But however it goes, I hope, you know, I really appreciate, I'm sorry in a way it's not normal times. I wanted, Phyllis and I were talking, it was all going to be about Southeast Asia, a neglected part of the world. Everybody cares about, or at least a lot of us sort of care about China. Whatever we think of it, nobody cares about Southeast Asia. I was going to show you slides and try to do a little cultural education for myself and all of you. But in a way, I'm very glad that that didn't happen and that Phyllis brought us back to, yeah, the present moment and its challenges. And I hope its opportunities for American business, but also for American society and American politics. So that does it for me. Thank you.
Wayne, can I just say something?
Yeah.
First of all, I loved your talk on China because I saw your handsome son and you enjoying yourselves and learning so much. And I just thought when you have wonderful slides, it's something that we have to share together.
I agree.
And so that was one of the, you know, that's the part that I miss about the programs when, you know, for almost 35 years, you're coming and speaking and showing the slides and talking to the people afterwards and having coffee and refreshments. God willing, we'll go back to that again. But at this time, we're adjusting to the change, or at least I'm trying to. So I appreciate the fact that you did change. It was fascinating what you said, and I appreciate it so much. And I want to thank you for agreeing to change it. So,
of course.
You. And
happy to do it.
And now your ideas are wonderful. How many do you think will be picked up by the Democrats?
Oh, I sort of thinking of the long haul rather than the short haul. I think Joe Biden would be well advised to not do anything that sounds too risky or too new. I do think the parts of what I'm saying that have to do with sort of sympathy for the Buy American side without crippling the economy, you know, as I think many proposals would, curtailing free trade, curtailing immigration, that sort of thing. No. On the other hand, you know, anything he can do that suggests some degree of rethinking. You know, we've had like, you know, very international trade starts hitting heavy on the American auto industry in particular in the 70s. So in the Carter administration, we passed trade assistance, you know, trade adjustment assistance legislation so workers could get retrained. We've been fighting these battles. It's been all these years. How well has that worked? I mean, you know, yes and no. So the idea that, you know, we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all business sector. Nowadays, those of us who care, you know, we can look at our, you know, if we care about non-GMO, if we care about organic, we all know, or we care that Patagonia has especially, you know, advanced social responsibility policies and one of its competitors doesn't. We check all that stuff. But what I'm really suggesting is we can go way, way further than that. And we can do it in a voluntary way rather than saying one size fits all. So it really depends how many people can organize themselves. So it's really a call for a social movement and reorienting the sort of reform spirit away from there's one best America for all of us. I don't think there is. Are the Democrats going to get that message tomorrow? Nah. Maybe they shouldn't. In winning presidential elections, you want to win a national election. Personally, and maybe that's my bias as a former member of the South Orange Maplewood School Board, my belief is the excellence of America is a whole lot more in our exceptional local institutions, local government. Not so much that the US Congress is better than the British Parliament. I don't particularly think so. Do I think we have much more interesting local government in the US and mostly better than our friends across the pond in Britain do? Yeah, I do. So my advice really is not so much for Joe Biden. It's sort of more for all of us in Soma. Care so much. I mean, national's important. But what's our own town like? What are the opportunities that we offer? There are some people in Soma who really are serious progressives. They really don't like capitalism. And as we all know, we're an integrated town with a lot of diversity and African Americans who feel the system, including in Soma, doesn't give us any real power or a real shake. And I personally, I'm a white guy, as you can tell, and I like capitalism personally. But I think you need to respect a diversity of points of view as well as background. In America, yeah, sure, we're going to have one country, one US military, one Congress. But we need to think harder and work harder to allow minority values and minority preferences to have their say in the marketplace, as well as in politics. So I'm not saying overturn the American model. I think the American model nationally is pretty darn good. I also think that we're exceptionally good in our openness to local experiments and local initiatives. So let's build on our existing strengths.
That's so true. So true. Any questions for Wayne? Michael? I don't know.
No,
Michael,
I'm unmuting everyone.
you're unmuting. Yeah, can you find out if any of them have questions for Wayne? Well, I have one for you, Wayne.
Good.
Okay. Okay. The retail industry. I feel
Yep.
terrible about it. I feel terrible that Warren Taylor is closing all their stores. I feel terrible.
It's sad.
I feel sorry that terribly sorry. When we were growing up, the garment industry, when you went into the city, you saw all those, the push carts or the clothing that's on the what?
Wheeling racks.
On the racks, the wheeling racks. You see
Yep.
nothing. Could we get that back ever? Can we ever?
Yes,
close
I
without
think I think we can, but that's largely what I'm interested in. So your question is right on target, and it's good because it helps us see a concrete example. Like, I've taught, global supply chain classes in which fashion is featured. And, in 1960, when I was alive, and many of you are, well active as adults, the percentage of clothing worn by Americans that was American made was, I believe, approximately 95%. Now it's about the reverse, 5%, if that. So fashion is exactly a central example of the withering away of American manufacturing with the global orientation. Now, my point is, wow, those low prices, the percentage of our incomes that we spend on clothes now has gone so far down compared to 1960. So I would say, look, are there enough of us who will be part of a real community, not just a virtual one, or, where we really will be locked into American businesses that, make clothes along with other things. Some of us will work at those companies and others of us will buy from them. So in a sense, what I'm really arguing for is multiple American economies instead of the one-size-fits-all economy where we all are part of one market. I'm arguing that some of us should create sub-economies in effect those of us who care about Buy American enough, I don't. I would not be part of a Buy American sub-community myself. I have some sympathy for it, but I care a lot, too, about workers in places like China and elsewhere in Asia who have gotten better off because of the global economy. But I think you can do it. But it's not the government saying we're going to force companies back to the US. Consumers have to organize. The laws have to be set up to facilitate organization. And yep, I think it pretty much needs to be done at the local level. Even if 20 million people in America signed a petition that says, we're here to buy from American companies that make American dresses and shoes, how's that going to work? But if instead there are 1,000 people in Soma out of the 40,000 or whatever who live in our town who know one another, and another X thousand in Milburn, and Newark, and so on, who all have their own communities and all really know one another, and are dedicated together to patronizing Buy American and to, yes, working for companies that are not the global companies, that are not Goldman Sachs, that are not Amazon. I think it can work. That's a big change in our society, admittedly, but it's a big change to bring fashion back. I hope it happens.
But what about the cost effective? I mean,
you pay more for what you get. You would have to decide if, and I see a hand up, so let me finish my answer to you, Phyllis. Someone else wants to get in. You just have to say you care enough, you are a member of a community, and yes, you also work in these types of businesses. I think that's that important. If it's just consumer oriented, I don't think it particularly has enough power. People say in the abstract, I'd like to get a dress that's manufactured in Massachusetts or South Carolina rather than in Guangdong. Some of us say, fine, no, help out China. But most of us aren't gonna do it in a serious way when the American dress costs twice as much. If we're part of a community of other people, you know, across the country, but locally organized, so here in New Jersey, out in Wisconsin, all across America, people organize on the basis of Buy American and working in such companies that produce American. Yep, I think
I'm going to interrupt here because Joan has her hand up currently, and Clara, I think, had something she wanted to say. So Joan, if yours is right off at this point, you go first, and then Clara. Some of you are muted, and if you want to say something, you can unmute yourself and just wait. Just jump in when there's, you know, a question has been asked and the conversation is wrapping up. So go ahead, Joan, and then Clara, okay?
There's one problem I see with your argument that I think became very evident during pandemic. And that is that because we were so dependent on the global economy, we were not able to get essentials that we needed quickly enough to respond to the pandemic. We had problems with PPEs, we had problems with medications, for example.
right.
A whole different category from the fashion example that you gave.
Right. There's a sector, there are sectors that are important, but you know, we're not going to live or die by whether we have a certain pair of shoes or a certain dress. We may well live or die based on whether we have appropriate personal protective equipment or appropriate medications or not. Good, so let me treat that as a friendly question, which I think it is, and use it to introduce something I wanted to mention with my usual interest in China, which is here is an area where I think Americans in general, American liberals are more likely to be open to this, but Americans in general, I think, should have a more sympathetic interpretation of part of the Chinese economic model than we do. In other words, China has a very large and dynamic, globally oriented business sector. Companies like Alibaba, TikTok, much in the news, many manufacturing as well as tech companies. It also has a very large state-owned enterprise sector. Americans, and I admit I've often been in this category, tend to view the Chinese state-owned enterprises that are businesses. You know, these are not the old communist things. They're trying to make money supposedly too, however effective they are or not at it compared to private business in China. But this sector in China is huge and does things like socially valuable production that's in the interest of the society that often is not necessarily the central area to focus on, though it can be for a private business. So do you want to think in the US, and this is more traditional Bernie Sanders, AOC type stuff, and certainly other countries other than China and the US, that there could be a role for state-owned enterprises, not as the idea that they're going to replace or dominate the private economy, but partly for the reason you mentioned, that those companies may be better situated than either the government itself or pure nonprofit enterprise to supply goods like the ones you mentioned, okay? So yeah, I think, you know, you can in one way or another create more possibilities. Our Chinese friends, whatever the distasteful aspects of their system, and they really do exist, obviously, authoritarianism, dictatorship, you know, have created an economic system, a business system that has genuine choice for workers. I can choose to work at a state enterprise or at a dynamic private sector company. We don't have that so much in America. We don't have so much the choice in business. Sure, we don't have to be in business at all, obviously. But business is what most people in our society and really everywhere in the world do, the type of firm that most people work for. Some of us, God bless us, I've pretty much always been a government guy, you know, law firm some, but mostly state work for Rutgers and other places. But it's mostly business. So how can we get dynamic enterprises, maybe not as dynamic as our globally oriented ones that do the kind of socially oriented production you're talking about? What were you thinking? Is it Joan? Is that responsive, or do you want more or something different?
No, that's responsive, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for the question, that's helpful.
Clara, did you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. Anyone else? So I'm going to throw in, Mary, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I go back a ways, quite a way. Are we really going to go back to buying as much as we used to? As a girl, my mother went, she was a professional woman, and she had some, you know, she had disposable income, is that the term? Anyhow, she would go twice a year because she had to dress a certain way as being a professional. And she would buy certain clothes. But she didn't go, my daughter, for example, now, she has anything better to do, goes and buys them. And I'm just wondering whether the era of some of this may not come back simply because people will discover they don't need 15 dresses when 5 will do, that kind of thing. That's what I'm wondering about, because I think some of it is going to drop off after this experience that we don't quite need as much as you don't have to redo your house every 5 years, you know, this kind of thing.
You sure don't. And that's another, one thing I haven't mentioned that I like a lot in what you're saying is that another group, I believe another minority, because there are just a lot of them, many of them overlap in terms of the people who are interested in them, is people who support kind of what you're saying, like voluntary simplicity, often environmentally driven. We're ruining our planet with all this darn growth. We can and should lead simpler lives. Okay. That's a position in some days, some of the time, I have considerable sympathy for. I feel in itself, though, it's sort of like the point earlier, is it ever really going to rise when, oh gosh, we're working hard at our jobs, it's just kind of nice, you know, maybe we don't need 15 dresses, but gee, fast fashion and H&M and Zara, they're selling our daughters and granddaughters, and yes, grandsons too, all this fast fashion. So is there a sort of continuing tendency to more? I kind of think there is, much as I like your question. I also hope that that environmentally oriented people, voluntary simplicity people, are yet another group that can organize with local community. And yes, some of these communities can be allied, at least for some purposes, with others. And that can support as well changes for the better. Because in the background is exactly what your question gets at. Should society all be growth? I've noted superior economic performance over the last 40 years by the US economy to, let's say, the German economy or the Japanese economy, especially over the last 30 years relative to Japan. But is our growth really all that great? I think for the majority of us, you know, it actually is. But for a minority of us, I really hope that we can organize, and that's one where voluntary simplicity can do a lot at a personal level. I think voluntary simplicity people have had a lot more success in the US than socialism has had. So in a way, not that I'm personally much more interested in voluntary simplicity than socialism, but my political and business reform stuff is sort of about, hey, give socialism on a voluntary basis a chance, because I think it's gone nowhere. I think voluntary simplicity has already gone somewhere. I think it could go even further, and I hope it will.
Wow. You touched upon so many interesting topics. Now everyone could talk about it. I loved your talk. And I thank you so much for coming, Wayne. And you'll come when the library is open too, I hope.
Of course. I'd be happy.
Then you could show the slide with your son. And I found this fascinating. And I appreciate it so much. And thank you all for coming. And be safe and be healthy and happy, all of you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Phyllis.
You're very
Wayne, the speaker, yes.